Welcome to episode number 47 of the American Regularis Podcast. I am your host, as always, JD Walter, and thank you for listening. We've got an absolute great episode today, so stick around for the whole thing. You're going to love it. While you do, please like, subscribe, tell your friends, whatever you're listening on, like and subscribe. Do me a big favor on that. Follow me on Twitter at reg_American1. If you want to get a hold of me, you can also email me at americanregularispodcast@gmail.com. Now, I am not going to bury the lead on this one. Today, we are going to be talking about the conversation that took place in the Oval Office between President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and unelected, or, no longer duly appointed President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it was a doozy, as you might have heard. And if you haven't, stick around because I'm going to give you all the details. This might have been the most iconic, certainly memorable White House discussion, conversation, whatever you want to call it, that I have ever seen. It not only was outside the norm of U.S. politicians bending over backwards and pretending that they have no sway or spine. In typical Trump fashion, it might have not had the most decorum or whatever. But this was a truly powerful moment. And I think not only from an entertainment perspective, which it certainly is entertaining, as you guys will find out shortly, it also is a huge, huge moment in what I would say is the conclusion of the Russian-Ukraine war. This is absolutely huge, and this is not normally the thing that you see on videos, right? So Zelensky flew in to Washington, D.C., the day before, a couple days before, and he was there to talk about trying to reach an agreement on this rare earth resource deal, right? Throughout Ukraine, in the east, but also the west, there's different precious metals and resources like lithium and whatever else that have some value. Now, Trump has been looking to receive some sort of capital from these things. He's like, whether it's, hey, we get access to these or we get 50% of the profits because, look, we've been footing this bill in the Ukraine war for a darn long time. Trump says to the tune of $350 billion. I don't believe numbers always show that. We know the government spending is a mess, so I don't know if we know the exact number. I've heard other people give it closer to the range of 150 or 200. Whatever the case, we're well north of $100 billion, and Trump thinks we should have some sort of restitution for that. The previous regime under Joe Biden, they kind of had it under the thing like, hey, we're providing the funds. You guys are providing the bodies to get thrown at the Russians. And Zelensky didn't like this. He thought, look, that's what the deal was. And now we got this, new sheriff in town with Trump. And he's saying he wants some sort of financial restitution or some sort of, payments on what he's considering a loan, which Zelensky didn't. So, all assumptions were that they were going to strike a deal. And it seems from the reports that Trump and Zelensky, everyone thought the deal was going to happen. Whatever that deal, I don't know the particular details, might be. But it didn't happen. And it happened, this deal falling through or being, taken off the table, happened on live camera, which is interesting because generally, when you have these two guys, they sit down and they don't sit straight across from each other. They sit at a 45-degree angle, so they're both facing the camera, and it's a real dog and pony show, and it's boring, and it's pleasantries and whatnot. That's what most of this speech was. Like, most of you that have seen this have seen 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 7-minute clip where it starts to get heated. Now, the whole thing lasted 30, 45 minutes, and most of it, right up until the very end, was this kind of blasé thing of not a whole lot of substance, right? It was kind of the meet and greet and the little meet the press type thing. And then Zelensky opens the door. Now, a lot of people are saying Trump and Vance had it planned and they ambushed him and stuff. If you watch this whole thing, that is not the case. Zelensky, we have to remember, since the war started, there have been Ukraine flags draped in the halls of Congress, put on the pins of however many politicians. He's been on the cover of Vogue. He's a media darling, right? The whole thing is he's an actor. He's a comedian, and he's been beloved by the media. I think Zelensky saw this opportunity as a real spot to say, hey, if I get the right soundbite here, do you think he thinks the media is going to frame it positively for him and negatively for Trump? Do you think this could be some sort of leverage? This is what I believe Vladimir Zelensky's idea was. I think this was the target he was shooting for. Now, to not bury the lead again, it seems to have backfired tremendously for him, which I think, in truth, is good for Ukraine in the long run. We are going to watch this clip. It is around 7 minutes, and I will be interjecting myself into this. But just as a little more of a prelude, Trump and Vance did not sit there and take it. J.D. Vance stops him dead in his tracks and grills him with a couple of poignant points that we're going to look at. And then Trump fires in right off the bat with him. And I've got to say up front, J.D. Vance, so far as vice president, has been impressive. We know he's a good speaker. He has good oratory skills. He's an intelligent man. And I think he was ready for this. And if he wasn't ready for it, I think he's just prepared enough to see instantly what Zelensky was doing. And he's like, Vance was not going to allow Zelensky this soundbite for the media to jump onto and hold up above their head like a little baby Simba on The Lion King. He said, no, this isn't the way the narrative's going to be. And he decides to show Zelensky how the cow eats the cabbage. It was very big. And this is coming hot off the tail of when he just stunned the Munich Security Council a week or two ago. J.D. Vance, within 2 months of being a vice president, has had more remarkable, memorable moments than any other vice president I can remember in my lifetime. I mean, aside from like Dan Quayle misspelling potato or Al Gore saying he invented the internet, but those were obviously not positive ones. Like J.D. Vance has shown himself to be a very shrewd and I would say talented politician so far. He is impressing me, and I think that will help Trump in more ways than one, which we are going to get into later. But let's get into this video this is towards the end of the Trump-Vance-Zelensky conversation in the White House, which I think the real, skin in the cat part was supposed to be done off camera, but it wasn't. It was done here. And one more thing up front, apparently, I don't think this has been confirmed, but there's a lot of people claiming that Zelensky was basically kicked out of the White House afterwards. Prior to that, as he showed up in his ceremonial theater gear of his little olive drab, Ukraine army shirt he's been wearing for 4 years. Trump did kind of power play him the way he does. He shook his hand and goes, "Oh, look, came in here all dressed up." I saw someone on Twitter saying he acted like he was like his big uncle or something, but it was. He kind of harassed him. You could kind of see like Trump was setting like the power differential, was trying to kind of establish what the hierarchy was right off the beginning. And you see Trump and Vance follow through with that pretty voraciously here. So let's give it a listen. I'm going to pause and talk as this goes on and just kind of give you the play-by-play.
This thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way, so that's the way it goes.
Okay, now, straight off the bat, we remember that Trump speaks like no politician ever, and that's somewhat a compliment, and it's also just that he speaks weird. He doesn't speak eloquently. You know, you heard him, I can be tough. I can be tougher than anyone you've ever seen, which is in itself funny. But the main point at the beginning was like, hey, you don't like Putin. You're full of hate with him. And look, it's understandable for a Ukrainian president to not like the guy invading his country. But you got to kind of shut up and take your medicine. The war is over, whether you want it to be or not. And so if you're sitting there sticking your chin out and saying F you when you're on the ground getting your face beat in, it's not going to do you any good. You're going to continue to just cause more pain for yourself. Now, in my analogy, it's getting punched in the face, but in the real world application, it's Ukrainian men dying, and Russians as well, but Zelensky doesn't have to care about them. He should be caring about his own people. It's more deaths of the Ukrainian army, more land being lost, less of a position. It's over. He's got to throw in the towel. And not just for the... You can definitely argue that it's also for the good of the country. It's hard to say, hey, I want to lose 15 to 20% of my country. You don't have to be happy about that. It's going to sting a lot, and that's going to cause problems. But that might be the best thing you're going to get. That's the best deal you're going to get. It ain't a good deal, sure. But you've lost the war. So don't throw good money after bad, and don't throw lives away in vain. Trump doesn't say it like that. He just says, you can't hate the guy. And this is more or less, I would say, a more eloquent essence, the essence of what Trump was getting at there. And then, of course, he was able to talk about how tough he was. So that was an added plus.
More questions.
Hey, I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
All right, solid point. Basically, he's saying the U.S., under Sleepy Joe Biden, wrote checks that Ukraine, their mouth wrote checks that Ukraine's butt couldn't cash. That's what he's saying. Now, the war thing didn't work. Let's try diplomacy. Now, historically, diplomacy has been kind of a key element of being the head of the executive. That's like right at the top of the resume is like skills needed, diplomatic ability. There has been, during this war, this unrelenting idea that to talk to Putin was just, you're Neville Chamberlain appeasing Hitler, and he's a madman who can't be reached, and to even talk to Putin, to even open communications with him, which Anthony Blinken and Sleepy Joe Biden were not doing. But it was beneath them, or it would be a stain on the office of the presidency to do that, when in fact it's one of their jobs. You don't break bread, or you break bread with your friends, but you don't have to go into diplomacy with people you're getting along with. This is something we've always known, but it's become almost this little moral feather in the cap of people that were like, well, I'm too self-righteous and too morally superior to talk with someone that I'm at war with. Okay, well, that just means war is the only option. J.D. Vance says that's wrong. I think that's clear. Throughout history, everyone's known that diplomacy is something you need to do.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him. Me, like a new president, in 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking.
Okay, so he says, hey, we Russia seized the Crimea in 2014 after the Maidan coup, which we're not going to get into all the details on that. I've rehashed that enough. But the U.S. helps overthrow. They say they're not going to work with the Russians, and they're going to kick them out of their only warm water all year round warm water port at, is it Sevastopol? I think. It's not Mariupol. I think it's Sevastopol. Russia's like, well, we're not doing that. We had the deal on that. Not going to happen. And so he does. It's not so much an invasion. They just kind of walk out of their base, like Dave Smith says, and they say, Crimea is ours now. We're keeping our base. There were people pleading with the Ukraine government not to do that because they knew it would be wrong. And look, I won't justify the invasion by Putin. But this was, Zelensky saying they should have started the war then. And then he's talking about how 2014 to 2019, by the way, this whole time, Ukraine is shelling people in the Donbass, firing artillery at many of their people. Some 4,000 people died in Ukraine in that conflict before the war of the Russians coming in, and which was from further aggression and arms deals with the U.S. And when I say aggression, I'm not talking about border crossing, but bringing in military equipment, and then ultimately as these talks with trying to make them more into NATO. We've gotten into all that. But he says, why should we have diplomacy with him? He rejected it. He went in after a ceasefire. Now, we could also argue that, did they keep up all of their end on the Minsk agreement? No, but that is more erroneous for this point. It doesn't negate the fact that you can't still seek diplomacy. Could be something to be wary about, but you can't just take diplomacy off the table. We've seen ceasefires open and stop before. You'll never have peace without diplomacy. That's just the way of it. Unless you kill every single person to a man, that's not any peace that anyone I know wants. Here we go. Continuing on. Here's where J.D. Vance slips off of his chain, cries havoc, and is a little dog of war here.
About the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going.
He calls him out. He's like, this isn't the call. This isn't the type of conversation we generally have in front of the cameras. But if you want to get chippy with me, if you want to have this talk, we'll have this talk. And here comes a power play. Like, the vice president has no qualms about taking Zelensky to task on this.
Around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems? Bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions.
No, we're trying to help you. You're just too stupid to recognize that, is what J.D. Vance said. And he tries to go, have you ever been to Ukraine? right? Because if you haven't been, then you can't know anything about it, right? You haven't had that lived experience or whatever it is Zelensky's trying to say. He's trying to discredit Vance there, and he says, I know your problems, whether it happened or not. And he goes, I know you bring in politicians and you give them a dog and pony show. You give them the propagandized version of everything. When you go to Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky isn't taking you on the van ride where they pull up to a guy, grab him, leave his dog on the street, and drag him into the van and send him to the front line. No politician sees that when Zelensky gives him the tour. Now, I'm not saying there isn't things that he couldn't show. Vance could learn something there, I'm sure. But it does not negate that Vance hasn't been there, that he is not well aware of what's going on. And Zelensky cannot dispute that. This is the point where Zelensky kind of realizes he might have bit off more than he can chew. Well, watch him try to choke on it. Or listen.
Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering all
position
these
to
questions.
dictate that.
That's exactly
Remember
what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very
You will
good.
feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself to be in a
from
very
the
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
cards.
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
So, there he's starting to say, oh, you don't have to worry about it. You got a big ocean. But sooner or later, you're gonna have to worry about it. Which is factually false, right? Russia is not a threat to us. Now, if World War III triggers, and then we're talking nuclear war, yes, then Russia is a threat to us, which is what they're trying to stop. And that's what Trump finishes on there. He's like, you're working with World War III. But when Zelensky's trying to allude to like, oh, eventually this ocean won't be enough and you'll fill it, that's just false. Look, Russia is not trying to conquer all of Ukraine, let alone all of Europe, let alone the world and the Western Hemisphere. That is ludicrous. And even if he was, the Ukrainians have fought like devils. They've given a great fight, obviously heavily financed by the United States. They've fought tooth and nail against these Russians, and in 4 years, they've only gotten 15 to 20% of Ukraine. So, on that, look, either you can say there's no chance you can win the war, and because his military is so powerful it's going to invade the U.S. or threaten the U.S. sovereignty or whatever, or you can admit, hey, our troops have done a pretty good job of keeping them at bay for only 15 to 20%. We're severely outmanned. Like, credit to them on that. You can't have one or the other. Which is it? And what it is the one that we obviously see. Russia's only been able to take 15 to 20% of Ukraine. Going into I guess it's 3 years. We're going into year 4, right? Okay. So, we're not going to fill that. That was a bad attempt. And when Trump brings up World War III, yes, World War III is when we would worry about Russia, because then we're talking about nuclear warfare, nuclear annihilation, and that really doesn't care about oceans. So, good rebuttal by Trump. He finally kind of steps in. He kind of takes J.D. Vance's lead. He recognizes what's going on. Trump understand whatever, the art of the deal or power, they always talk about how he tries to give a big handshake. He realized, he goes, okay, we're going to take control of this. We're not going to let him push us around. And it's 2 verse 1, and Zelensky's not in his first language. J.D. Vance is very good at speaking, and Trump is pretty good at bullying. So he's like, oh, we've got this. No problem. And they start to put him in his place. Zelensky looks nervous as a cat covering shit during this whole discussion, by the way. It's worth watching. I know a lot of people are saying that they think he's under the influence of some sort of upper. I don't know how to speculate on that. I'm not good at telling you that. And I move around and make enough facial features. People could probably say that about me. So I'm not going to comment on that, but he does look uncomfortable. We'll leave it at that.
You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
That kind of reminds me of the part on Superbad when Jonah Hill's like, people don't forget. Now, I actually think if there's any part of J.D. Vance's dealings in this conversation, this is probably my least favorite because it seems to me you could say, well, okay, are you doing this to prevent World War III? Are you doing this to help Ukraine save what's left of their country? Or is it out of pettiness? I don't think Vance should have brought up this part, but this is more just kind of really humbling Zelensky. You haven't said thank you. You're going to come in here and argue? We've given you $150 billion, this and that. You should be saying thank you. You owe us. It's not my favorite part of this speech, but it still is just continuing to pile on Zelensky. And this is when, I don't know if he realizes it, but at this point, I think this is when the resource deal is getting taken off the table.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this.
I
You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying-
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men are
for your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I
Again,
tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long.
So Trump's like, oh, I did this. Well, I think Vance is the one that started it. But hey, you can't win this war. You're not winning it. And Trump takes credit. Of course, that's why I did it. I wanted to keep this going for so long. That's why we did it. And you can also tell it really ruffled his feathers when he was like, I've been in this alone, which militarily speaking, for the most part, they have. I think there's been some Polish troops. They've had people on the ground assisting them, right? We have weapon systems that we can pretty much confirm have to be set up by the U.S. for the Ukrainians to use. We found the Russians, I should say, found the different U.S. Spy bases in eastern Ukraine. So it's not particularly true, but in the large scheme of things, it's mostly true that it has been just the Ukrainian men fighting against Russia. He also says, for 3 days. I heard this from Putin. Well, I don't know if it was 3 days or 2 weeks or 4 months or whatever. They've certainly fought hard. But yeah, it's undeniable that U.S. military equipment has been a huge boon for them. And most of this was either gifted or on loan, depending on which one of these guys you listen to.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
That wasn't.
This is probably Trump's best point. He's like, your people are dying, and the ceasefire is all you're going to get. You want to stop the war, but you don't want a ceasefire. That's the only thing you can do. And he goes, I want an agreement. But he wants an agreement on his terms, and that's just not how the world works. When you lose the war, or are losing the war, and face facts, I don't care if you're Team Russia, Team Ukraine, or just someone probably like me, on the outside from an American, I have no vested skin in the game. I don't like the idea of young men dying. Regardless, any way you look at it, objectively, biasedly, unbiasedly, from any side, there is no feasible way Ukraine can win this. At that point, you got to do what you can. And what you can do isn't a lot. It's taking bad terms at the negotiating table. But it's time for that table, because that negotiating table is still a terribly bad peace is better than a just war. In, I would say, 999 out of 1,000 situations.
With me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama.
All right, that's all we're going to listen to on that, but I just can't get over, even during these momentous moments on video, powerful stuff. I mean, we're talking about ending wars under difficult circumstances and world leaders meeting and confronting about the fate of their nations. And Trump just can't help but to keep talking trash on Biden. Biden, that was his deal. The very failed president. He's so stupid. He's got a bad haircut. Even me, like, it doesn't matter. Trump could be giving a eulogy for his best friend and would probably at least twice reference how dumb Joe Biden was. He's not a gracious winner. And like it or not, there's plenty of reason to not like how Trump talks or delivers his speeches. But there's just something so amusing that in such a big moment in modern history, he's like, also, let me get another soundbite of it in here, just talking about how dumb and senile, sleepy Joe Biden was. I mean, that's the world we're living in. And look, don't let that overshadow you. The main point of this, which is that this might have been Zelensky's undoing. I believe from here on out, the next move of Trump and Vance would probably be if Zelensky, I mean, he's obviously flying back to Kiev with his tail between his legs. I would say their next move is saying, look, if you're not going to, lie and prostrate and, apologize and then do what we say, I think they're going to say, look, this guy's elected term is over. He's extremely unpopular. Trump's already mentioned all this stuff. I think they're going to really try to force elections and say, let's get in someone who is willing to come to terms with Russia. And now, look, that's good for Trump because he's talking about trying to get people done in the war over in the first 100 days. But I think in the long run, it's good for the Ukrainian people because they just can't lose more men. Their demographics will be so screwed up, their population will take so long to recover. And that's from like the macro outlook on it, right? Like looking at people as like units. But let's look at them as fathers and sons right now. So that is the best thing. Like get Zelensky out, get someone in there who will sit there and sign the paper for whatever it takes to get these bombs to quit dropping and these bullets to quit flying. So I think that's their next move. I also want to say one more thing on J.D. Vance being so impressive. I just don't see a lot of vice presidents or remember so many having a seat right at the table on a big thing like this. And Vance is the first person to speak twice on this part about it. Like, feel free to chime in. Trump has no problem with it. A lot of people talk about how jealous and stuff is. I think Trump loves that J.D. Vance is this firebrand, this like little Marine attack dog going after people for a couple of reasons. One, Vance is effective at it. Make no mistake, he's smart. He's a better speaker than Trump. He knows his stuff. He's intelligent. He does a very good job. I'm a hardcore libertarian, so I will have my disagreements with him. I wish they strong-armed Benjamin Netanyahu the way they did this to Zelensky. Of course, we won't see that. But Vance is very capable. And not only does that help Trump in his negotiation or his administration, but I think it also serves as an insurance policy because if midterms were to happen and in a way that the Democrats take, the House and the Senate or whatever, some big sweeping thing, they will be impeaching Donald Trump. As soon as they are humanly possible to, they're going to be trying to impeach him. We know that. Also, there are other ways, left to your imagination, where people might try to figure out ways to depose Trump or to make sure that he's not in the Oval Office anymore, right? We've kind of already seen that in a little town in Pennsylvania. When you have a vice president that is just as, if you want to call it America first, but when he's so lockstep and seems just as aggressive in Trump's policies as Trump is, now what are you going to do? Okay, you can't cut the head off the snake through impeachment or other means anymore. Trump ain't going away. If he is gone away, it's still the same thing, except now you have Vance, who's honestly, I mean, he's not Trump. Trump's kind of a cult of personality, obviously, but he's very capable, and in many ways more so than Trump. I think J.D. Vance, sweetly and shortly put, is a huge insurance policy for Donald Trump. So it's going to be super interesting to see what happens in the next week or so of this Russian-Ukraine war coming to its end. Hopefully, we see fighting stop soon. Obviously, this is going to be the only topic today. We've already got a pretty good length on this podcast going. I was waiting and planning on doing one for the Epstein tape release or file release. That was a flop, obviously, just a real big nothing burger. And then I do want to give one shout out, though, to Thomas Massie on the congressional budget being passed. He was the only Republican to say no, and I absolutely loved it. We see one man sticking to his moral convictions, unlike basically everyone else in D.C. And all the Republicans are singing the praises of Doge and how they're cutting money and how they're saving money. And then every one of these congressmen vote for trillions of dollars to be added to the next budget, showing that they have the exact same stripes on their fur as the Democrats. And it's always been like that. They just preach a good game. And so why is it that they're big on Doge, but then they want to add size to they want to pile on the debt? Why is that? I think it's kind of like the AfD situation over in Germany when the Conservative Party is like, well, we're not going to go with the AfD. We're going to try to coalition with the left, these socialists. And it's like, well, that doesn't even make sense. Well, it does make sense when they're all one neoliberal group kind of rowing in the same direction. And that's what you see in D.C. with that. Those Republicans in Congress, you can like them and you can sit there and you can wave your red hat whenever you think that, hey, we got another Republican in instead of another Democrat in. Okay, there might be some benefits to that, not on the budget. Not really. They always they always add to the debt just as much or worse than the Democrats, right? Because they're of the same ilk. Thomas Massie is different and takes courage, takes integrity, takes principles. God bless Thomas Massie. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.